Silence can be sharper than any words. And on that night, a room filled with the most powerful figures in America witnessed exactly that. A seasoned journalist, notorious for his sharp attacks on the Trump family, stepped forward with a smug smile. He was fully prepared for a public takedown of Tiffany Trump, right in front of hundreds of distinguished guests. He thought he had full control of the game. But there was one thing he didn't see coming. Barron Trump, the young man who rarely appeared in the media, yet whose words, whenever spoken, had the power to make an entire room hold its breath, stood up. And with just one sentence, Barron left the entire hall in stunned silence. A complete reversal that no one could have predicted. You won't want to miss this moment, because it will change the way you perceive power, arrogance, and the strength of intelligence. Inside the Hay Adams Hotel, one of the most luxurious venues in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere of the charity gala had reached its peak of grandeur. Magnificent crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a soft, golden glow, reflecting off glasses of fine wine and the dazzling evening attire of the elite. The gentle hum of sophisticated conversation wove through the air, blending harmoniously with the elegant symphony of a live orchestra. Politicians, business moguls, and some of the most influential figures in America mingled effortlessly, their voices a hushed murmur of power and prestige. Among them, Tiffany Trump stood out like a beacon of elegance. Dressed in a stunning sapphire blue gown that gracefully embraced her silhouette, she exuded both sophistication and quiet strength. Every movement she made was deliberate, poised, yet entirely natural, never ostentatious, yet undeniably commanding attention. She engaged effortlessly with key benefactors, her eyes alight with passion as she spoke about the philanthropic projects she was championing. To many in the room, Tiffany was not just the Trump princess the media often portrayed. She was a woman of intelligence and determination, one who had carved her own path despite the ever-present scrutiny surrounding her name. Not far away, Barron Trump stood in quiet observation, an imposing figure amidst the crowd. At just 18 years old, he already towered over most of the guests, his 6'7" frame giving him an almost statuesque presence. Yet, it was not just his height that made him stand out. It was his demeanor. Unlike many of those around him who laughed and exchanged pleasantries over champagne, Barron positioned himself at a discreet vantage point, taking in the room with a calm and calculating gaze. He had never sought the spotlight. He had never needed to. To those who didn't know him, Barron's silence might have been mistaken for passivity, but that assumption would be a grave miscalculation. Because while Barron Trump may have been quiet, he was always watching. He understood that in a room like this, words could be as sharp as blades, and glances could cut deeper than any weapon. And tonight, when he caught sight of a man making his way toward Tiffany with a distinct air of hostility, he knew. His moment had arrived. Arrives. Michael Reynolds. A name well known in media circles, a journalist with a reputation for ruthless investigative pieces. The lead writer for the Progressive Daily, his work was infamous for its sharp critiques of political figures, particularly anyone bearing the Trump surname. But Reynolds was not just a journalist, he was a hunter. He thrived on exposing his subjects at their weakest, pouncing on vulnerabilities, and spinning them into headlines that guaranteed maximum controversy. He wasn't at this gala for the charity. He wasn't here for the cause. He was here for one reason only: to take down Tiffany Trump, publicly, spectacularly, and in front of an audience that would amplify his narrative across the world. A slow, self-satisfied grin curled across his lips as he tightened his grip on the microphone in his hand. He had rehearsed this moment countless times. He had planned every angle, every question, every camera placement to ensure that what was about to happen would go viral. Reynolds was a man who prided himself on being 5 steps ahead of his targets. But tonight, he had made one crucial miscalculation. He wasn't the only one paying attention, and he had no idea. Someone had already seen through his plan before he even uttered a single word. Barron Trump was ready. Michael Reynolds moved swiftly toward Tiffany, his face betraying a sense of undisguised satisfaction as he noticed the shifting energy in the room. All eyes were gradually turning in his direction. This was his moment. The moment he had been waiting for. He wanted shock. He wanted scandal. He wanted a headline so explosive that by the next morning it would dominate the front pages of every major media outlet, and he was utterly convinced that he had the upper hand. With a practiced motion, he lifted the microphone to his lips, ensuring his voice carried just enough to command the attention of the crowd. "Miss Trump, just a quick question." There was no greeting, no courtesy, just a direct attack. "Many believe your family's wealth gives you an unfair advantage in philanthropy. Some say that these charity events are merely a PR stunt, a way to polish your public image rather than genuinely helping others. What do you have to say about that?" His words cut through the air like a blade, slicing through the refined elegance of the gala, leaving an almost audible tension hanging in the space. Tiffany hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The room reacted immediately. The soft murmur of conversations died. A hushed silence settled over the crowd. Some guests leaned in slightly, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Others watched with thinly veiled intrigue, eager to see how this moment would unfold. Tiffany's fingers instinctively tightened around the delicate stem of her champagne glass, her lips parting as she prepared to answer. But before she could utter a single word, another voice cut through the silence. A voice, deep, composed, and undeniably firm. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds." The entire room shifted. Barron Trump stepped forward. Reynolds hadn't expected this. Standing tall and unwavering, Barron positioned himself directly between Tiffany and Reynolds, his towering frame a silent yet unmistakable barrier. He was neither aggressive nor confrontational, but there was an air of authority in the way he carried himself, a quiet dominance that demanded attention. His piercing gaze locked onto Reynolds, not with anger, but with an unsettling calmness. Then, slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "I'm curious," Barron said, his words measured, almost surgical. "Is this a question you would ask of every philanthropist in this room, or is it only of concern because our last name is Trump?" The impact was instantaneous. The tension in the air crackled. Reynolds hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected shift in power dynamics. But years of experience had taught him how to recover quickly. He forced a smirk, shaking off the initial shock. He leaned slightly forward, as if reclaiming the upper hand. "Your family is known for prioritizing wealth and business over social issues. Wouldn't you agree?" He challenged, his voice sharp, expecting to unsettle the young man in front of him. But Barron did not flinch. He didn't need to. He didn't argue. He didn't react. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and, with a few effortless swipes, found what he was looking for. Then, without a word, he held the screen up for Reynolds to see, and there it was. A headline from the Progressive Daily, the very publication that employed Michael Reynolds, displayed in bold, undeniable print. "Trump family donates millions to children's hospitals and veteran programs." A thunderous silence descended upon the room. A few guests craned their necks to get a better look at the screen. Others exchanged hushed whispers. Reynolds opened his mouth as if to respond, but Barron spoke first. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice steady and unshaken, "it appears even your own newspaper does not agree with the claims you just made." Reynolds' smirk vanished. His face paled. He looked around as if searching for support, but found none. No one moved. No one spoke. Because in that moment, everyone understood. The game had just been completely turned on its head. The grand ballroom stood frozen in time. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes remained locked on the phone in Barron's hand, where the headline from the Progressive Daily, Reynolds' own publication, was displayed for everyone to see. Openly acknowledging the Trump family's massive donations to children's hospitals and veterans programs. A few guests craned their necks to get a better look at the screen. Others began whispering amongst themselves, as a ripple of realization spread through the room, like a silent tidal wave of truth crashing down on them. Michael Reynolds, exposed. The veteran journalist who had built a career on dominating interviews and controlling narratives now found himself completely outmaneuvered. His eyes darted between the phone screen and the faces around him, searching for an escape. But there was none. He opened his mouth, desperate to salvage the moment, but Barron spoke first. "Mr. Reynolds," his voice low yet razor-sharp, "it seems even your own newspaper doesn't agree with the claims you just made." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Whispers ignited like wildfire across the ballroom. Those who had been quietly observing now spoke in hushed tones, some exchanging amused glances, others shaking their heads at the sheer irony of the situation. Reynolds turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. But he was a seasoned journalist. He refused to back down so easily. Clutching onto the last remnants of his crumbling confidence, he scrambled for a rebuttal. "But," he stammered, "surely you understand that your family's privilege gives you an unfair advantage in these charitable efforts?" Barron didn't hesitate. A subtle smirk curled at the corner of his lips, not arrogant but calculated. "Privilege isn't the issue," he said, his voice steady, each word landing with precision. "It's how you choose to use it that matters." The entire room fell into silence once more. Then, Barron took a step closer, closing the distance between him and Reynolds, not with aggression, but with undeniable authority. "We choose to contribute rather than criticize," he continued. "But what about you, Mr. Reynolds? With the influence you wield in the media, are you truly reporting objectively, or are you simply chasing controversy for attention?" The words cut deep. It was a question not just for Reynolds, but for every journalist who had ever twisted facts for the sake of a headline. Reynolds froze. His mouth fell open, but no words came out, because Barron Trump had just spoken a truth that could not be denied. A standing ovation. It started with a single clap, then another, and another, and within seconds the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The walls of the Hay Adams Hotel trembled under the force of hundreds of hands clapping in unison, the sound reverberating like an unstoppable wave. Tiffany turned to Barron, her eyes shining with pride. "You always know how to turn the tables." Barron gave a small shrug, his expression as composed as ever. "Sometimes, the best way to fight back is to let the facts speak for themselves." Michael Reynolds, defeated. His grip tightened around the microphone, his fingers trembling slightly. He had lost control. He knew it. There was nothing more to say. Without another word, Reynolds turned on his heel, slipping into the crowd like a man trying to disappear, a fallen predator retreating into the shadows. The next day, Barron Trump takes over the media. By the next morning, the internet was on fire. Barron Trump's The Tables became the top trending hashtag on Twitter, while videos of the confrontation spread like wildfire across YouTube and TikTok. Every major news outlet, both left and right, was forced to cover what had happened. Even publications that had previously been critical of the Trump family were left with no choice but to acknowledge the undeniable brilliance of the moment. One journalist wrote, "The boy who was once considered the quietest Trump has now proven himself to be the sharpest mind in the room." And as for Reynolds, he became the story he had tried to create. Under immense public pressure, the Progressive Daily was forced to issue an apology, admitting that their journalist had approached the event with bias. Reynolds himself? He was suspended indefinitely, his credibility shattered, his career put on pause indefinitely. And just like that, a man who had set out to take down Tiffany Trump ended up destroying his own reputation instead. A young man who had always remained in the background stepped forward to defend his family in a way no one had anticipated. And that is a lesson the world will never forget. If you think Barron handled the situation perfectly, comment 1. If you believe this could have been handled differently, comment 2. And don't forget to hit subscribe to stay updated with more compelling stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.